Hello, I'm Louise Ross, the author of Women Who Walk, how 20 women from 16 countries came to live in Portugal, and the sequel or companion read, The Winding Road to Portugal, 20 men from 11 countries share their stories. And these two books are a collection of mini memoirs, the stories of 20 women and 20 men from very diverse cultural backgrounds who moved country to country, sometimes independently, sometimes with partner and or family, en route to a life in Portugal, though for some it was not their final destination. And today I've asked Jayne Dyer, one of the interviewees from Women Who Walk, to read a couple of pages from her story, and then we'll talk a bit about her journey. Jayne is originally from Australia, an academic of art theory and a very successful international installation artist who impressively has been awarded a Commonwealth of Australia Public Service Medal for contributions to arts and education. And in 2013, the Australian federal government awarded Jayne the inaugural Individual Artist Award for Arts Achievement in Asia. So Jayne, welcome and thank you for being available to talk to me today from your studio in Porto. And I'm going to hand it over to you to read your excerpt. And again, welcome.
Thank you, Lou. It's great to be on the program, and congratulations with both your books. I look forward to the next one. Oh, wow. So here's the excerpt. I'm reading from my iPad, so I'll be glancing on and off screen. Yeah. In 1992, not long after Tiananmen Square demonstrations, I participated in an Australian exhibition in Beijing. Two artists, one arts writer and the curator of the exhibition were invited to the vernissage. It was my first time in China and my first exhibition overseas. I was in Beijing for 1 month, and although I'd experienced other Asian countries such as Laos, Indonesia, Singapore and India and stuff, I was absolutely overwhelmed by the still palpable closed-door Mao heritage. I'd never experienced an illegal undercover pop-up exhibition. Raw, dislocated, the voices of artists responding to Tiananmen and opening up to a Western audience. In 2007, I moved to Beijing. 23 million people, a massive city of small villages, enclosed in 7 ring roads. In the first year, the Central Academy of Fine Art contracted me to establish an international visual arts program. Its goal was to introduce Chinese art students to Western models of learning. For 12 months, the students worked with local and international practitioners in painting, sculpture, architecture, design, and drawing to prepare a portfolio for graduate programs overseas, notably the UK, the US, and in fact, Australia. I thought what a rare opportunity to step into what I call the China machine, to experience and understand a little more how things worked. As academic director, I couldn't believe the bureaucratic top-down control. It was probably the toughest work I've ever done. The experience made me acutely aware of how every culture has its particular ethical and achievement tenets. I know Australian tertiary education ideology inside out, but as an outsider in China, navigating the Academy's political and cultural protocols was an enormous challenge. After 8 years, for me to continue to live in China had become off limits, both politically and environmentally. I considered Istanbul, the collision of East and West, for me is very provocative. Then synchronicity struck. In 2013, I'm going backwards, in 2013, I came to Portugal. My relative, James Newitt, was attending Marmush, which is a 12-month think tank for creatives. Visiting him, I found Lisboa. It's old Europe racing towards the 21st century. To me, Portugal's geographical location raises questions about our perception of what constitutes identity. Portugal's eastern border is Europe, its Atlantic border, Africa. In negotiating nationhood, the Portuguese gaze out to their own disparate, implicated political histories, while Australians look up to the rest of the world, I think sometimes searching for what that identity is. Now, as an immigrant in Portugal, I have been given a certain liberty to exist here, which is not necessarily the case in other countries that I've spent significant time. As an artist, I can work anywhere, but for me, when one feels the sensibility to live, it's very important. I subsequently bought an apartment in 2015 and made Portugal home.
Thank you, Jayne. Thank you. It's always a different experience reading your own story out loud. So thank you for doing that. One of the things that strikes me is that, I mean, this excerpt from your story is incredibly rich and dense with a lot of topical issues. But coincidentally, I was on a webinar last night. The speaker was talking about cultural differences, immersing ourselves in other cultures and navigating the challenges of cultural differences. And of course, you do address, well, you sort of the subtopic in this excerpt is the cultural differences that you've navigated, particularly in Asian countries, specifically China. And I'm wondering if, as a result of that, that you found that art or working with other artists and students of art ultimately is a universal language without necessarily the barrier of culture.
No, I think it is. I think it is. There is many cultural tenets. So I think perhaps the discourse around art has certain commonalities in terms of there's a political situation that art exists in, a social situation art exists in, there's a particular time, a history, a gender, an identity. As soon as I say all that, immediately it becomes one country, another country, another country, another country. So the universals are there as titles, but the interior of them, I think, is distinctly different. And for example, the situation I had in China, and I work a lot in Hong Kong as well, you know, there is a particular language around the aesthetics and politics, which determines certain sort of practice and certain sort of language around practice. And I think when I was working in China at the academy, it became very present that these students, you know, about 18 to 20, were preparing themselves to go and live for possibly up to 3 to 5 years in another country, and to kind of take on the form of what we see as an American language of practice or an Australian language of practice or a British. But embedded in that is the incredible importance of holding on to what it is that is the character and personality of that country. And the Chinese are very, you know, very interior about that and very focused on not losing the core product. The skin can be something of what I would call a universal or international language, but the content is something else altogether. And I would say that about most cultures everywhere. I think it's there to penetrate deeply so that there is actually a political language that is transversal is a very, very complicated thing. And we see this in not only in the arts, we see this in every aspect. You know, from music that is German music, which is so different from Tibetan music, and so on and so forth. Mm-hmm. Although that all maybe, you know, something may be played with a string universally, or something may be played with a drum universally.
Yes, I understand. So did you bring a a level of awareness to your life in Portugal and the art community in which you've immersed yourself here from China? Were there certain things that you became aware of in China that then you brought to your work here?
I think we're just accumulations of the experiences we have. So if I think of the experience in China, the experience in Australia, experiences in other countries, living in France with residencies in Italy, doing a lot of projects in the Eastern Europe, all of that is sort of like little bits of sticky things that's, you know, part of we assimilated. I guess the way I would describe it would be an example, maybe. Over the years, I've had lots of residencies in different countries. And when I was a very young woman, in my first one, which was probably about maybe 30, around 30, something like that, and I thought, oh, I'm here. I've got to make a lot of work and it needs to somehow speak of where I am. And so I, you know, sort of hold myself in some studio and worked away. I think it was in France, you know, and, you know, at the end of it, I thought, well, actually, I don't even know what this work's about. It was really about work I dragged from Australia that I sort of put a gloss of something on it. And it became exotic, but it wasn't actually a language about what I am and who I am and what I do. So made me perhaps kind of identify that whoever we are and whatever we do, those experiences that we take on but we get immersed in, giving time and not expecting immediate results of what it is you're in to stick. And that can be from reading a book to living in another country, to digging a garden to work out how plants grow. I think it's that sort of durational aspect of life, I think, that becomes who we are, that immersion, exchange, the dialogue between people, the dialogue between place and person. So what I've brought from China is probably what I've brought from Australia, which is probably what I brought from when I was 2 years old, which is probably what I brought yesterday. Yeah. I think, and equally what I'm gaining living in Portugal is another dialogue of a European attitude towards art practice, and a particular practice here, I think, which is a Southern European, the Spanish Iberian Peninsula practice as well, which is a romantic practice, which is different from a German practice. So all of those things sort of filter in. Yeah.
Yes. And create this sort of kaleidoscopic experience of the evolution of yourself and your work, I guess.
Well, like you, with your experiences in Australia, but in fact, a large part of your life in America, and the influence of that, and it becomes this wonderful percolation, doesn't it? And
yes, it does.
Net or mesh.
Yes, and then because our conversations on this program are fairly brief, I'm aware that we've got a little bit of time left, but I'm also aware that you're in your new studio in Porto, which is a gorgeous space. I've been up there to visit, and you're sharing it with some colleagues, and you're collaborating on an interesting project that I'm not sure you addressed in your story because it's somewhat recent. Are you able to share a little about the vision of this collaborative project that you're working on now?
Yes, of course. In just before COVID, actually, in fact, in a week's time, on the 27th of January, I bought this studio last year, and then went to Sarajevo for a project, came back, and, you know, didn't see the studio again until June. We just had to close the doors. But in that time, I've been working since the Hamburg Triennale, which was 2018. I met Virgilio Ferreira, and he is an artist, actually, a photographer, but also directs and runs the Porto Biennale of photography, and which I was in 2019. And he and I share a lot of common attitudes about practice, and particularly about the idea of how art doesn't need to, but for us, it needs to have a sort of a social foundation, and particularly a social, ethical, ecological foundation. Virgilio runs an organisation called Cyclo Circle, and I invited him to come and work in the studio with his team. And he works on incredible projects. One that's just been rolled out is called Sustenta, which is 6 artists that have been placed in places throughout Portugal, in municipalities, to address certain municipalities' initiatives to improve their local water systems, how to be solar panelled, have solar panel light, and so on. Really wonderful energy and water use and recognition of problems throughout. And the artists are not there to document, they're there to interpret, to culturally engage, but make work that is a reflection of what's occurring within the community, but as a cultural product. So in every project that Virgilio is doing, including the upcoming Biennale, which will be on in May, which is called What Happens in the World Happens to Us. And that is a collection of artists from around the world that will be showing in, I think, 14 different venues throughout Portugal, throughout Porto. The crux of it is about how we can be sustainable, how we can exist on this planet with a soft tread, whatever that means. We're in an accelerated, I think, perigoous, a very dangerous situation, really, however much we like to think it'll all be fine. And it's marvellous to have met a like mind and a like-minded community. So every day we're in this studio working, talking, having our lunch, and it's a conversation I deeply believe in. So for me, I think I've fallen so fortunately in a space where I feel like I'm being culturally fed every day.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Jayne, is there a website or something online where people can go to find out about Cyclo?
Yes, if they just put in I think the latest, most up to date is Cyclo, CICLO, Biennale 21 .com or .pt.com.au. That's Cyclo.
Okay.
If they put Cyclo anything, Portugal, they'll get stacks on all the different projects that Cyclo does.
Okay, cool. I'll get those details and I'll put them in the description of the show underneath the video.
Oh, that's superb. That's wonderful. And for everyone, within this mad COVID moment, I hope that people can come and attend, with our masks.
Yeah, me too.
With our gloves.
Yeah, I know. We are living in strange times. Well, thank you, Jayne. Thank you so much for your time today. And for those viewers who are interested to learn more about Jayne and read her story, of course, it is in Women Who Walk, how 20 women from 16 countries came to live in Portugal. Thanks, Jayne. I'll talk with you soon.
Thanks, Lilian. Ciao.